Hi everybody, welcome to the Azure On Air podcast. We're at the Integrate Summit today, and I've been joined by Clemens Vasters from the Azure Messaging team, so it's a really great opportunity to speak to Clemens. I always enjoy chatting to Clemens about messaging and eventing concepts. Clemens had a really good session this week, and he's got a lot of people from his team here, so thank you for joining us, Clemens.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So I said earlier, the one question I really want to ask you is you've been, like, as long as I've worked with Azure, you've been involved in service bus and messaging, and I think people sometimes don't appreciate that it's actually a pretty cool area to work in, and sometimes maybe think that what's really changed over the years, because messaging's messaging, even though the products have evolved so much. And I wanted to kind of get from you, what is it that after I think you said it was 17 years or something you've worked in that messaging space. What keeps you excited about messaging and events after such a long period of time?
It's the customers and the use cases. We find the way how the product has evolved is mostly through finding out what we're missing in the product that certain customers need. And even though we only move datagrams from A to B, ultimately, in most cases, the way how customers need to have them moved is very different.
Yeah.
So you have these event streaming scenarios where we now have customers who need to push 8-10 gigabytes per second. We have scenarios where we need to have transactional messaging that now needs to be replicated across regions because the data is financial transactions that must never get lost under no circumstances, which is even now regulated for financial industry. So just two examples of ever-changing requirements, which require us to go and adapt a little bit to things. And then I think also as the industry gets broader, as there's more programming languages, there's more interesting industry trends. We have more compute power, we have more storage power. Customers are being hungrier for data, and they're hungrier for more current data. And addressing all those challenges so far has not gotten boring. So I'm still in it because I like talking to the customers, like super interesting scenarios, because messaging in most sophisticated applications, messaging sits in the middle.
Yeah.
So I get to do motorsports and football and financial and airports, and so we get to see all of those things, how those things work behind the scenes. It's always exciting.
I guess one of the things as well is over the evolution of integration solutions people build, it's the scale for you guys is just from when Azure started doing messaging solutions, the scale today is just phenomenal. And it must make those problems at gigantic scale must be quite exciting. So can you, for people who may be fairly new to messaging, can you give us an idea of like how many service bus messages and event messages Azure's processing generally a day? I know you often have statistics that you share at Integrate.
Yeah, we have summary stats that we share, and we currently do about 10 trillion transactions per day.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
That is a staggering number, and I remember that 10 years ago maybe, we had like 1 trillion per month, and now we're at 10 trillion per day, an average. It's, I think, 300 petabytes that we're pulling through that land in databases in storage or just get processed at the back. It's enormous numbers. The biggest of that, the big share of all this has event hubs, and that's kind of by design because it transports logs and telemetry, etc. But also Service Bus also has hundreds of millions of transactions per day.
So you guys have introduced a lot of really good announcements this week about some of the things that you're doing in the messaging space. Can you share with us some of the ones that you find the most interesting this week?
So new announcements that we have this week here is, I think, the top announcement that we held for Integrate that we didn't talk about at Build is Geo-Replication with data for both Service Bus and Event Hubs. Yeah. So we talked about this today for the first time in a public event. And this is going to be phased in as a public preview over the next 2 or 3 weeks. both for Service Bus and Event Hubs. What we do is we allow you to pair a namespace that you have, and this could be existing namespaces, with another namespace in another region. We're actually allowing you to add the region, and we're actually going to create that replica for you. And you can go and actually create multiple replicas if you want.
Right.
And you just keep using your normal Service Bus namespace. And contrary to the GeoDR features that we had so far, we're replicating everything, all the data, all all for Kafka, all the checkpoint data, for Service Bus, all even the message state. Right, so individual messages and whether they're locked or whether they have been scheduled, and like all these aspects of the message. And you have two modes. One mode is async replication. The other one is sync replication. With async replication, you're mostly working on the primary namespace, and then as we change the status of the system, those state changes are then being sent out to the regions without any performance impact. It's just normal, so you get a live backup that is as close to the original namespace as possible. Synchronous replication is a bit is taking that to the extreme, and there, if you send us a message or if you take a message, we will make sure that the message that you give us is replicated to all the secondary regions before we then realize it in the primary region, so that we have effectively full consistency for that message, and only then we will go and ACK it back. So when you have that mode and you get an acknowledge, which means your client doesn't throw, then you can be sure that that message is in all regions and is safe. So the two scenarios we cover with this is one, the region may disappear, right? And there is many reasons for why your application is no longer viable in a region. It might, a total failure of a region, I find that fairly, a large catastrophe has to happen for that to happen. But it could be that something is just wrong with the networking, you can't reach it, there's your application may be broken in some way, whatever, so that you have to go and flee from that region to another region. So two scenarios. One is graceful. Graceful means we're literally going to go and drain all the consumers, we're going to slow them down, and we're going to hold them in that state, which means we no longer accept messages from them. And then we do the failover, meaning we're transferring the DNS information over to the secondary.
Right.
We'll wait out that situation. Basically, the clients don't know. And then as the clients, as we know that the state is ready, we're going to cut the connections. The clients will then automatically reconnect, but they're going to reconnect to the secondary. Right. So it's magic, and you don't really see it, because our clients with the retry policies and everything, they auto-connect. And since the state is fully consistent, you don't see any change. What you'll see is that for about a minute, traffic will stall. But since we're keeping the client basically entertained, you're going to may see some exceptions, which you are supposed to handle anyways. But it's not like for a really dramatic situation of just failing from one region to the next.
So my interpretation of what you said there was, I remember the paired namespaces previously was there was some of that stuff kind of available, but there's a lot of work still on the customer side to really do it properly. So I think what you're saying is you're taking a lot of that burden away from the customer and kind of auto-magically making it happen with a very slight service interruption. Is that the big change from that perspective?
So the prior GeoDR feature was for business continuity, mostly to go and replicate the entities that you had. So it was, for Service Bus, if you have 400 queues, those 400 queues would also exist on the other side.
Right.
But we did not replicate the actual messages.
Right.
So the big change here is that we're now replicating all the messages in all the message state, which means that you literally can give up on that namespace over here, and then you can fail over, and the other namespace over there is going to be your new primary. We see this a lot from customers who have implemented their own disaster recovery strategies before, who have separate facilities, and who do drills where they go and fail over from one place to the next place. We see this with airlines, we see this with banks, and so we're now giving them effectively the capability to go and do this, but it's not They don't have to worry about this. And you can fail forward and you can go and fail back. So you can go and basically go back and forth between those.
So I guess really, I mean, for me, that's really touches on the first question, which was, as a customer, that seems fairly sort of like, I just have that service interruption, and I don't really appreciate that exciting bit for you making all that happen behind the scenes. I can imagine it's a colossal amount of design work and architecture and development work, and that's really for me what messaging's been about. It's the backbone that we just trust, but actually there's a lot of hard engineering's gone to making that so successful, and it underpins so much on Azure, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what about other announcements that you've made this week? Then what other things have stand out?
We have new features in Event Grid. In Event Grid, we can now, and that's a feature where it's been a bit surprising that it has not existed yet. You can now publish from a topic to a topic.
Right.
And that's important because sometimes you have we have these namespace topics which have pull support. We have the older topics which have which do kind of push to certain targets, but they're also kind of the system topics that we have. So we have various kinds of topics, and a topic exists for various reasons. And so having the same ability that you have in Service Bus, where you can go and forward from one entity to the next entity, is something that we're now also enabling.
As a customer, then where do you think I would have use cases to use that? I guess that's like the fan out sort of topic in front of a topic to go really wide.
Well, we have it's usually useful where you have an existing topic that you're using to push to a webhook, and the events that are coming out of that topic are now also interesting in some other context where but the subscribers on the other topic that you want don't have the same rights as on that original topic. So you basically create a route, and then you can grant more liberal permissions on this topic. So these are kind of typical scenarios, or building fan-out trees, or just leveraging different features.
So does that feature? Because obviously, Event Grid, there's a few different flavors of topics between the system topic, partner topic, Event Grid domain. Is that feature specific to particular types of topic, or is it general for all of them?
They can now generally do that.
Right. That's pretty cool.
And then we have custom namespaces for Event Grid MQTT. So Event Grid MQTT keeps growing. We have just added last will and testament support for it. If you're not familiar with that feature, it's an MQTT built-in feature where you can go and a publisher can basically park a message on the connection they establish, and when the connection gets lost in some way, that message then gets sent on a designated topic, which means that you can go and realize I just got disconnected message, and so everybody who's listening to you will know that you're currently not available. So we just implemented this, and with that, the only feature that we're missing on our relatively new MQTT support that we have is the retain feature. And the retain feature is something that we're going to add before the end of the year. That's the plan.
Yeah. So was there any other things that really stood out for you this week as well?
Well, Anache Borea has been talking about our event streams capabilities. And that's something that's a very new area for, certainly for our customers. We have been working on this for more than a year now. And that is effectively taking the messaging assets that we have, primarily Event Grid, Event Hubs, and Stream Analytics, and bundling them together, integrating them into the Microsoft Fabric data platform.
Right.
So that you now have a SaaS platform that deals with data, that now can also deal with streaming data, where we have worked very closely together with our friends who are building the Azure Data Explorer, the Custo team, who now has the KQL database that sits inside of Fabric. And we have built I think fairly revolutionary integrated data pipeline that has all the capabilities of Event Hubs. So you can go and create yourself a Fabric instance if you want. Go to fabric.microsoft.com and it will prompt you to create a free trial. Inside of that, you can go and create an event stream, and that event stream, you can go and create a custom endpoint as the input, and that gives you an Event Hubs endpoint, and you can go and get a connection string, either for Kafka or for Event Hubs, and then start streaming, and you get effectively all the nice features we have in ASA, for instance, with the no-code editor, etc., all built as an integrated pipeline. And that's also where a lot of the feature investments that we're making is working towards schematizations, message catalog, schema registry, and all those things to make that pipeline smoother. Because ultimately what we want to achieve with that platform is that users, end users, can start building streaming application as a call from right to left. They can go and ask a question of the platform, probably through Copilot, and then we will select the stream sources for them, or we can go and give very good requirements to developers for how to harvest those events, so that we can then go and give them
I think actually that was really interesting, because that touched on one of the questions I wanted to ask you. Was a lot of the other teams we've spoke to this week are telling us about the relationship between their products and some of the AI investments that are going on. So you touched on that a bit there. I guess is the idea of sort of the messaging platform embedded within Fabric enables an AI use case. Is there any other places that you think AI is going to really come into the messaging stack?
So generally LLMs have I think a very large role in many aspects. One important thing, and this is why we're working so hard on especially schemas and metadata, is they're really great transformers, right? I mean, if you go and ask an LLM some trivia question, it will give you an answer, and sometimes it will just go and just fabulate, if it just make something up. But they're really great transformers, which means if you tell it, hey, here's a data structure I want you to emit, and don't give me anything else, just give me the JSON, and I'm going to give you some input, and then you're going to analyze that input, and you're going to put that into that structure, It's going to do that job really well. So there is lots of really difficult mapping work that we do in integration for data structures that only show up once a year, where I think we can go and start putting constraints around the LLM so it can actually do that job really well. And if it can do the translation outright, it can also write the code to do that translation. And I think that's where really the strength is that you can go and say, here's that data structure, a sample of it, and many samples of it. Here's my target infrastructure. Go write me a Python program, or write me something that will go and do that translation reliably. And we're having a lot of good success with that, and it's something that I think transformation is going to be great. Sample data generation is going to be great. And then in general, helping with creating more type-safe experiences. And helping end users, deal with the complexity of all that data by giving the LLM enough catalog information that the LLM can select from to go and create queries. Create queries not over a selection of 5 things, but create queries over a selection of 5,000 things or 10,000 things. And for the LLM to say, this question correlates with these 5 sources. Let's go and create a query across those 5 sources. So there's a lot of potential for AI here.
So we're just about at time, Clemens. There's 2 last things I want to ask you. First off, is there anything you'd like to share with the audience for things that you think they should check out from the messaging team following the conference, or any other bits about the conference you'd like to talk about quickly before we come on to the last one?
So a thing that I definitely want people to check out at home is the new Event Hubs Emulator. I haven't talked about that even. Yes, the most requested feature we ever had. So Event Hubs Emulator is out now. There will be Service Bus Emulator. We've promised that.
Right. Oh, you'll be asked for Service Bus on premise next by Rick when he's
it's an emulator, but it does its job. I already use that in my unit tests. So that's a thing to check out. check out the documentation. Certainly, go and create yourself a Fabric account and play with that. Mm-hmm. That's something that I would certainly recommend. And then on the schema side, for people who are integration developers in particular, one of my explorations that I'm doing is on the schema conversions and schema mappings, metadata mapping front, and we're doing this all through a superset of the Avro schema model.
Yeah.
So I wrote a little tool that's called Avrotize, Avrotize. That's up on GitHub. You can actually go and find an extension for it in VS Code, in the VS Code marketplace. And then if you install this, you can go and right-click, for instance, a JSON schema file. You can go and then turn that into an Avro schema. But then if you have an Avro schema and you right-click that, you can go to practically any database. You can generate code. Mm-hmm. So it's a tool that shows how it's a Rosetta Stone for data structures basically, and it's an experiment kind of on the way towards building the platforms that we want together with.
The last question I wanted to ask you, a bit of a fun one actually. So, as the architect for the messaging platform, there's a number of products that have been developed over the years under your area, so Service Bus, Relay, Event Hub, Event Grid, and so on. Which one's your favourite out of those? Out of those ones, I'm kind of asking you which one's your favourite child in a way.
Yeah, the Relay is still my favorite child.
Yeah.
I have to say it's the first product that we started.
Yeah.
And it's we don't talk about it much, and it never shows up kind of in the advertising. But it's still incredibly successful. It still grows. And it's just a magic way how you can go and host a public endpoint from your own PC. Without the firewalls and VPNs and any of these things, where the Relay just goes and makes that communication possible, and it's used in many Microsoft products. Yeah. It's used for example, in Visual. It's used in Visual Studio. It's used in Azure Arc. Mm-hmm. The way how you actually get the control pipe into Azure Arc is all done through the Relay. Yeah. And so that's if I have to pick a favorite child, that's the favorite child.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked that one actually, because it's not that long ago, just December sort of time, I was actually using Relay. I'd never touched it for years, and I had this problem, and I almost forgot it was there. And I'm like, Relay? I'd used Relay for years, a long time ago, and I was like, that's actually the perfect solution. So simple. And it let me just do the job, so I'm quite pleased you picked that one. But thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We'd love to have you on, maybe remotely in the future sometime. Sure. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.